So far, we have learned how to conjugate le passé composé with the helping verb avoir. So you would take the helping verb avoir and conjugate it, j'ai, tu as, il a. You would then add the past participle, the participe passé, which for an ER verb ends in an E accent aigu, an IR verb ends in an I, an RE verb ends in a U, and there are irregular past participles that we have learned as well. For example, j'ai mangé, I ate. Elle a réfléchi, she thought. Vous avez attendu, you all waited. We have also learned that there are 17 exceptions that do not use avoir in the passé composé, they use être. These 17 exceptions need to be memorized. These 17 verbs use être, and we're going to look at how to conjugate them now. First of all, you'll need to conjugate the verb être, your helping verb. Je suis, tu es, elle est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. Je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. Here's what it will look like. Je suis allé is how you'll say I went. Conjugating aller in the passé composé, it uses être and the past participle. Tu es sorti. Il est mort. Nous sommes partis. Vous êtes restés. Ils sont venus. Notice that if the next word starts with a vowel, you might hear these S's. Je suis allé. Forming the past participle follows the same rules as what we have learned before. ER verbs like arriver end in an E accent aigu. Arriver, entrer, tomber. IR verbs like sortir or partir end in an I. Sorti, parti. And then RE verbs like descendre end in a U. Descendu. We have already learned some exceptions that have irregular past participles. These IR looking verbs, venir, revenir, devenir, are actually irregular. Their past participles are venu, revenu, devenu. The verb naître, to be born, the past participle is né. And mourir, to die, the past participle is mort. Hopefully you have already memorized these. But what I did not point out on the previous page was that some of these had extra endings. Nous sommes partis, that past participle had an extra S. Ils sont venus, that past participle had an extra S, and that is what we need to talk about next. This is why the passé composé starts off kind of manageable and then starts to become tricky, is that when you are conjugating passé composé with être, the past participle has to agree, meaning it has to match in both gender, meaning it could be masculine or feminine, and in number, singular or plural, with the subject. So if a girl wanted to say, I went, she would say, je suis allée, and there would be an extra E on the end. If two boys were saying, we left, they would say, nous sommes partis, with an extra S on the end. This is going to be tricky because you can't hear that extra E or that extra S. These are going to be silent endings most of the time, but you do have to write them. So you are required in the passé composé with these 17 être verbs, you are required to make them agree in gender and number. That means that when I am talking about myself, I, a female, will have to add an extra E on the end. But if the speaker is a male, they don't add that extra E. If I am talking to someone and using the word tu, if I'm talking to a boy, I don't add an E on the past participle. But if I know that the person I'm talking to is feminine, I do add an extra E on the past participle. If I'm talking about il, I don't add any extra endings because masculine singular is the default. I don't add E's or S's. But if I am talking about one girl, elle, I would add an extra E on the end. Notice there are no parentheses here because this one is for sure. I know I'm talking about a girl, so she's feminine. I have to make it match. If I am talking about me and others, so I'm saying nous, aka we or us, That group might be feminine. If I'm a girl and everyone else in the group is feminine, I would add an E. But I would definitely always add an S because if I'm talking about myself and others, it is a plural group. If I am talking to vous, I may need to add an E if my audience is feminine. I may need to add an S if my audience is plural, if I am talking to you all. I might need E and S if I am talking to a group of girls. But if I am talking to somebody formal, I might not need either of these endings if that person is a male. For example, if I were talking to the French president and I said, vous êtes allé, I wouldn't have an E or an S because he is masculine singular. That's why these are both in parentheses. If I am talking about a group of boys or a mixed gender group of boys and girls, I will add an S to show that it is a plural group, they. And if I am talking about a group of just girls, I will definitely add ES to match to make it feminine and plural. For example, je suis allé, to say I went, might be masculine if our speaker is a boy, might be feminine if it were me talking, for example. Tu es sorti, you went out. If I'm talking to a boy, it would look like this, tu es sorti. If I'm talking to a girl, tu es sortie. He died would not have an extra ending on mort because it is masculine singular. But if she died, I would add an extra E on the end, elle est morte. That is going to be the only occasion where I can hear that E. We'll talk about mourir later. Nous sommes partis, if it's a group of boys and girls, it would just have an S. If it is only girls, you would have ES. Vous êtes resté, you stayed. I could be talking to one man, one woman, a group of men or mixed gender, or a group of just women. So I would need to make my endings match based on who I am talking to. Ils sont venus, I would add an S for ils plural. Elles sont venues, I would add an ES for feminine plural. So again, you can't hear most of these endings. Here's what they would sound like. Je suis allé, tu es sorti, il est mort, elle est morte, nous sommes partis, vous êtes restés, ils sont venus, elles sont venues. It's a lot to remember these little extra endings, but you cannot skip it. You do have to make your past participles agree. Je suis allé, tu es allé, il est allé, elle est allée. You don't hear those endings. Actually, would pronounce these T's. Il est allé, elle est allée. You don't hear the extra endings, but you do need to keep in mind if you add extra E's or S's. Mourir, you will hear the ending because of that T consonant. Je suis morte for a girl, tu es morte, il est mort, elle est morte. Nous sommes morts, nous sommes mortes. Vous êtes, oh, I need an accent circonflexe, désolé. Vous êtes mort, vous êtes morte. Ils sont morts, elles sont mortes. If you know who the subject is, you do not need to put masculine and feminine forms. For example, if I'm a boy and I say I return to the stadium, je suis retourné au stade, no extra endings. I know that I am male, so I leave it as is. You do not need to show both options if you are writing about your own self. However, if you do not know the subject, you could add both forms if you want to show that you are not aware if it's a boy or girl. So if I'm saying, hey, did you go to the party? And I'm sending that to no specific tu in particular, I would be able to say, est-ce que tu es allé à la fête? And I could put E accent aigu with an optional E ending because I'm not sure who I'm talking to. Same thing if I'm talking to a group, if I'm talking to the whole class and saying, vous êtes né en 2005, you all are born in 2005, I could put this E and put this S to say that I am acknowledging I could be speaking to girls, I could be speaking to plural. So you have the option of putting that. Now, if I just said vous êtes né and E, that could also be correct. You have the option of also using parentheses if you don't prefer the way that those periods look. You could say vous êtes né, maybe an E, maybe an S. One last thing to note, you only do agreement for être verbs. You don't do this for avoir verbs. This is where it starts to be confusing and tricky, and people start to put S's and E's on everything. We did not learn to add an E to entendu, so don't go back and add one. If I want to say she heard the alarm, elle a entendu le réveil, conjugate as normal. You do not add extra endings to show that she is feminine. For some reason, avoir verbs do not follow this rule. They did chores. Elles ont fait le ménage. I don't add ES's to fait. Fait never changes. So these extra E's and S's are only for Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp verbs, only for verbs that take être. As far as forming negatives and adverbs, use the rules you already know. You put ne pas around your helping verb. Je ne suis pas allé. Les chiens ne sont pas restés. Elle n'est pas sortie. So you'll put ne in front, pas after your helping verb. And then short adverbs will go in front of the past participle as you've already learned. Je suis déjà arrivé. Je ne suis pas encore parti.